Most high school drama ends with rumors or a fight in the hallway, but in East Moline, Illinois, a teenage feud turned into something far more sinister. What started as jealousy and tension between classmates ended in a gruesome murder that shocked the entire state. Sarah Kolb was just 16 years old when she became the ringleader of one of the most shocking teen murder cases in Illinois history. What began as high school argument and turned into brutal and calculated act of violence. One that would leave a young girl dead and 3 teenagers forever changed. In early 2005, Sarah was a student at Quad City Youth Conference, an alternative high school in East Moline. She had a reputation for being tough and outspoken. She was also known for her on-again, off-again relationship with both boys and girls. That's how she met Eddy Reynolds, a new student who just moved into town to live with her father and stepmother. Adrian was only 16, and she quickly tried to fit in, making friends, joining the job program, and finding her place in a new school. Sarah and Adrian became close almost immediately. Some say they even had a brief romantic connection, but that friendship quickly soured. Sarah grew jealous when Adrian started to talk to other students, especially boys. She accused her of trying to steal attention and spread rumors. The tension kept building and it all came head-on on January 21st, 2025. That afternoon, Sarah invited Adrian to eat lunch in her car with her and another classmate, Corey Gregory, a friend who was loyal to Sarah. The 3 teens sat in a car in the Taco Bell parking lot where they often hang out. But this wasn't just lunch. According to court records, Sarah suddenly began to attack Adrian, hitting, choking, and screaming at her. Corey joined in, holding Adrian down while Sarah strangled her to death. After killing her, the 2 teens drove around Adrian's body in the back seat, unsure of what to do next. Eventually, they brought her to a home of another friend, Nathan Gadet, and returned later with a plan to dismember her remains using a saw. Then they burned her body in a fire pit behind the trailer home, hoping to destroy the evidence, but their plan didn't work. When Adrian's father reported her missing that evening, police quickly began to investigate. It didn't take long before classmates came forward with rumors and suspicions. Sarah's behavior raised red flags, and both she and Corey were soon brought in for questioning. Corey cracked first, confessing everything, from the murder to the cover-up. Sarah tried to deny it, but the evidence was overwhelming. Both Sarah Kolb and Corey Gregory were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and concealment of a homicide. Corey pled guilty and was sentenced to 45 years in prison. Sarah went to trial, where the jury heard disturbing details about her jealousy, manipulation, and complete lack of remorse. In 2005, she was found guilty and sentenced to 53 years behind bars. Sharon Carr seemed like just another teenager growing up in the 1990s in the UK. She was only 12 years old, small, quiet, and mostly kept to herself. But beneath that innocent appearance was something far more disturbing. In 1992, she committed a crime that stunned the nation. Not only was it brutal, it was entirely unexpected. And it made Sharon Carr the youngest female convicted murderer in British history. It all began on June 7, 1992, in Kimberley, Surrey. A 15-year-old girl named Katie Ratcliffe was walking home alone after a night out with friends. Somewhere along the way, she was attacked, stabbed more than 30 times, and what appeared to be a random and frenzied assault. Her body was left near her path, and the case shook the local community. Katie was bright, friendly, and had no known enemies. Police struggled to find any leads. There was no apparent motive, and the crime scene offered little evidence. The case quickly went cold. At the time, no one suspected Sharon Carr. She was only 12 years old and had no known connections to Katie. Over the next few years, Sharon began to show troubling behavior. She was expelled from school for violent outbursts and eventually sent to a local care facility after stabbing another student during an argument. It was while she was in custody for that second stabbing that the truth finally came out. Sharon began bragging to staff and other girls about a murder she had committed years earlier. At first, people didn't believe her. After all, she was so young. But when authorities looked closer, they found her diaries. Inside were disturbing and detailed entries about the killing of Katie Ratcliffe. Sharon described the stabbing in ways only the killer would know, mentioning the location, the number of wounds, and even writing how good it felt. She called it fun and claimed to feel powerful during the attack. Investigators reopened the cold case and compared Sharon's accounts to the original evidence. It all lined up, even though they couldn't find forensic evidence linking her to the scene. Her confessions were so specific and consistent, and left no doubt in the minds of detectives. In 1997, 5 years after the murder, Sharon Carr was formally charged with Katie Ratcliffe's killing. In court, Sharon showed little emotion. Her behavior was erratic and unsettling, and psychiatrists described her as dangerous and disturbed. She was only 17 when she stood trial, but the jury found her guilty of murder. She was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 14 years. The judge called her crime brutal, senseless, and motivated by nothing more than bloodlust. Over the years, Sharon Carr's name continued to appear in the media. Even behind bars, she was considered as a serious risk. Reporters described her as a violent toward staff, obsessed with knives, and often fantasizing about killing again. Because of this, she has never been released. Her minimum term expired long ago, but the parole board has repeatedly denied her freedom, citing concerns for public safety. To this day, Sharon Carr remains in prison, one of the most chilling examples of a young person capable of committing such violence act with no clear motive. In Knoxville, Tennessee, it ended with one of the most disturbing crimes ever committed by a teenager. In 1995, a young woman named Christa Pike carried out a brutal murder so violent it shook even seasoned investigators and earned her a place in history as the youngest woman on death row in modern America. Christa Gail Pike was only 18 years old when she committed one of the worst brutal murders ever carried out by a teenager in the United States. What makes her case especially chilling isn't her age, but how senseless the crime was. In 1995, Christa went from an average troubled teen to the youngest woman on death row in modern American history. Christa had a rough upbringing in West Virginia. She was exposed to drug use, neglect, and instability from a young age. By the time she was a teenager, she dropped out of high school and enrolled in a Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, a government-run facility where young adults can learn job skills. That's where she met a 19-year-old boy named Tedderl Ship, who became her boyfriend, and a 19-year-old girl named Colleen Flemmer, who would eventually become her victim. Tensions quickly developed between Christa and Colleen. Christa believed that Colleen was flirting with Tedderl, and she became obsessed with the idea of getting revenge. On January 12, 1995, Christa lured Colleen out under the pretenses of wanting to settle things peacefully. Instead, she led her to an isolated area near University of Tennessee campus with Tedderl and another girl, Shanda Peterson. Once they arrived at the scheduled spot, things turned violent fast. Christa began attacking Colleen, beating her and carving a pentagram into her chest. The assault lasted nearly 30 minutes and was drawn out and brutal. When it was finally over, Christa delivered the fatal blow with a large chunk of asphalt, crushing Colleen's skull. As if that weren't horrifying enough, Christa kept a piece of Colleen's skull as a trophy. The group returned to their dorms as if nothing happened, but Christa couldn't keep quiet. She started bragging to friends and staff about what she'd done, laughing, showing off the piece of bone, and even claiming it was fun. Within 36 hours, she was arrested. During questioning, Christa confessed quickly and with little emotion. Investigators were stunned by how casual she was about the murder. Tedderl Ship was also arrested and admitted his role in the attack. Both were charged with first-degree murder. In court, the details of the crime horrified the jury. Christa was painted as the ringleader, controlling, jealous, and remorseless. She was found guilty and sentenced to death in March 1996, making her the youngest woman on death row in the US at just 20 years old. Tedderl was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shanda Peterson was present but didn't participate in the violence, received a plea deal, and testified against them. Over the years, Christa has remained in prison, occasionally making headlines. In 2001, she attempted to strangle another inmate with a shoelace. In 2012, she was caught trying to orchestrate a failed escape plan. Despite multiple appeals, her death sentence still stands. As of now, she remains at the Tennessee Prison for Women, awaiting a final decision on her fate. At first glance, Sheila, Eddy, and Rachel Shoaf were just normal high school girls from West Virginia. They took selfies, posted on social media, and spent time with their best friend, Skylar Neese. The three seemed like typical teenagers, laughing, gossiping, and navigating the ups and downs of a high school friendship. But lurking behind the pictures and sleepovers was something much darker, something no one could have imagined. Skylar Neese was 16 when she vanished on July 6, 2012. That night, just after midnight, she slipped out of her bedroom window and got into a car. The surveillance footage showed her leaving willingly. Her parents initially believed she had run away, convinced she'd eventually return. As the hours stretched into days, then weeks, the search grew more desperate. Police, friends, and even Sheila and Rachel helped handing out missing posters, hoping someone had seen her, or so it seemed. In truth, Sheila and Rachel knew precisely where Skylar was. They had, after all, lured her out that night with a deadly plan. Though the three girls had once been inseparable, their bond had fractured. Tension had simmered for months. Fights, secrets, jealousy, typical teenage drama, but this time with horrific consequences. Rachel later confessed their motive for murder. They simply didn't like her anymore. It was chilling in its simplicity, horrifying in its cruelty. That night, they told Skylar they'd hang out and smoke in the woods, just like old times. Once they reached a remote spot in Pennsylvania, just across the state line, they walked a little deeper into the trees. Rachel and Sheila had brought knives, concealed within their hoodies. They feigned forgetting a light, and Skylar turned to help them search. They counted to 3 and began stabbing her. Skylar tried to flee, but she was outnumbered and caught off guard. They stabbed her over 50 times, then covered her body with branches and left. For months, the girls returned to school and carried on as if nothing had happened. Sheila even tweeted things like, "Miss you, Skylar," and feigned heartbreak in front of Skylar's parents. But Rachel began to unravel. She stopped attending school and eventually suffered a breakdown, leading her to confess everything to the police in January 2013, 6 months after the murder. She not only told them where to find Skylar's body, but also admitted that she and Sheila had planned the entire horrific act. Once investigators had the confession, they moved in on Sheila. She maintained her facade almost until their very end. However, the evidence coupled with Rachel's testimony proved overwhelming. In court, Rachel expressed remorse and pled guilty to second-degree murder, receiving a sentence of 30 years in prison with a chance at parole after 10 years. Sheila, who never publicly displayed the same level of regret, pled guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Today, both women are serving time at Larkin Correctional Center in West Virginia. Stephen Schulhoff was a 48-year-old father living in Altamont Springs, Florida. He worked hard, took care of his family, and lived a relatively quiet life. But in February 2004, Stephen's name would make national headlines, not for anything he had done, but because of the shocking betrayal that ended his life. His own daughter, 23-year-old Courtney Schulhoff, was the center of it all. Stephen had raised Courtney mostly on his own after her mother passed away when she was young. Like many parents, he tried to set boundaries and keep her on the right path, especially as she entered adulthood. But the relationship became strained. By the time she turned 20, Courtney was acting out, skipping school and getting into trouble. Things only got worse when she started dating a man named Michael Morin, a 20-year-old with a criminal record and a growing influence over her life. Stephen disapproved of Michael from the start. He felt the relationship was toxic and he didn't hide his frustrations. Tensions in the home rose quickly, and Courtney eventually moved in with Michael. But not long after, the couple found themselves out of money and without a place to stay. Stephen, despite his concerns, agreed to let Courtney and Michael move back into his apartment temporarily. It was a decision that would cost him his life. On the night of February 10th, 2004, Courtney and Michael argued with Stephen. According to court records, Stephen had told Michael he was no longer welcome in the apartment. That night, while Stephen was asleep in his bed, Michael Morin took a metal baseball bat and entered the room. He struck Stephen repeatedly in the head, killing him. Courtney claimed she wasn't in the room when it happened, but evidence showed she knew about the plan and she didn't try to stop it. After the murder, the two fled the scene but were quickly caught by police. In the trunk of Stephen's car, officers found his body wrapped in a blanket. Blood evidence, witness statements, and phone records helped piece together the timeline. During interrogation, both Courtney and Michael pointed fingers at each other. Michael claimed it was all Courtney's idea. Courtney insisted she didn't know what he was doing to do, but investigators didn't buy it. In court, prosecutors argued that Courtney had played a major role in the murder, even if she didn't swing the bat. They believed she encouraged Michael, helped plan the killing, and stood by as her father was brutally attacked. In 2006, Courtney Schulhoff was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Michael Morin, who had a lengthy criminal history even before the murder, was also sentenced to life behind bars. The case shocked people, not just because of the violence, but because who was involved. A daughter turning on her father, allowing her boyfriend to carry out a murder, all because of a relationship she refused to give up. There was no money involved, no inheritance, no grand motive. Just anger, manipulation, and a devastating lack of remorse. Paolilla seemed like an unlikely person to commit a brutal crime. She was a quiet, shy teenager from Texas who had overcome a difficult childhood. Struggling with alopecia that caused her to lose her hair and eyebrows, Christine was often bullied growing up. But by the time she reached high school, things had started to improve. She had friends, a boyfriend, and her confidence was finally growing. No one could have predicted the darkness that was about to unfold. In 2003, Christine was 17 years old and living in Clear Lake City, a suburb of Houston. She had formed a close friendship with two girls from school, Rachel Colorotis and Tiffany Rowell. These girls had taken her under their wings, helped her with makeup and social life, and giving her the support she had been lacking for so long. To outsiders, they were just a group of teens hanging out and enjoying summer. But on July 18th, everything changed. That afternoon, Rachel and Tiffany were at home with Tiffany's boyfriend, Marcus Barcelo, and his cousin, Albert Doug Sanchez. They were just relaxing at the house when Christine Paolilla and her boyfriend, 21-year-old Christopher Snyder, showed up. What happened next shocked the entire community. At some point during the visit, a fight broke out. The exact details are still debated, but prosecutors say Christine and Christopher had come to rob the house, and when things got tense, it turned deadly. Armed with two guns, they opened fire on the 14th. It was chaotic, violent, and over within minutes. All four victims were shot multiple times. Some were even beaten after being shot. Christine had once called these girls her best friends. Didn't just witness the attack, she participated in it. After the murders, Christine vanished from public life. She eventually got off drugs, married someone new, and tried to live a quiet life. For years, the case remained unsolved. Detective followed leads, but nothing stuck. Till a random tip came in 3 years later. Someone who had heard Christine confess finally came forward, and police opened the investigation. When they searched her home, they found evidence linking her to the crime, including one of the murder weapons. Christine was arrested in 2006 and charged with capital murder. At trial, she blamed everything on her then-boyfriend, Christopher Snyder. But Christopher couldn't speak for himself. After hearing the police were closing in, he had taken his own life in a wooded area in New York. Despite her defense, the evidence against Christine was overwhelming. Her fingerprints, her confessions, and disturbing nature of the crime all pointed directly at her. The jury found her guilty on all counts. In 2008, Christine Paolilla was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She's currently serving her sentence at a Texas state prison. Shanda Sharer was just 12 years old, bright, energetic, and full of life. She had recently moved to New Albany, Indiana, and was just adjusting to a new school, making new friends, and trying to find her place. But in early 1992, her young life was cut short in one of the most heartbreaking and senseless murders in U.S. history, carried out not by strangers, but by 4 teenage girls. The conflict began over a boy. Shanda had briefly dated a girl named Amanda Heverin, who had previously been involved with another teenager, Melinda Loveless. Melinda was intensely jealous and furious about the relationship. Despite the fact that Shanda and Amanda's romance had already ended, Melinda couldn't let go of the resentment. Her anger would eventually boil over, and it would take a tragic, irreversible turn. On the night of January 10th, 1992, Melinda Loveless convinced 3 other girls, Lori Tackett, Hope Rippey, and Toni Lawrence, to help scare Shanda. They planned to pick her up, take her for a drive, and intimidate her. What started as a plan to frighten her quickly spiraled into something unimaginably cruel. That night, they drove to Shanda's house and lured her outside by pretending Amanda wanted to see her. Shanda, unaware of any danger, went willingly. Once in the car, the girls drove her to a remote location. From there, the situation escalated violently. What was supposed to be a prank rooted in jealousy turned into a prolonged and horrifying attack. The details of what happened to Shanda that night are some of the most disturbing on record. But what's most important to remember is that a 12-year-old girl was brutally targeted by teens who should have known better. Her body was discovered the next day near Country Road in Jefferson County, badly burned and unrecognizable. It didn't take long for the guilt to catch up with at least one of the girls. Toni Lawrence, the youngest in the group, was overwhelmed with guilt and went to the police. Her confession unraveled the entire story, and soon all 4 girls were in custody. The arrest stunned the community. These weren't hardened criminals. They were teenage girls between the ages of 15 and 17. In court, the horror of what they had done shook the even seasoned investigators. Rather than go to trial, all 4 girls eventually accepted plea deals. Each one expressed some level of remorse, while many people felt it came far too late. Melinda Loveless, the ringleader, was sentenced to 60 years in prison. Lori Tackett also received 60 years. Hope Rippey was sentenced to 60 years but later her sentence reduced and was released in 2006. Toni Lawrence, who cooperated early, was sentenced to 20 years and was released in 2000. In 2014, a shocking crime in a quiet Wisconsin town left people around the world stunned. A 12-year-old girl was nearly killed, not by a stranger, by 2 classmates she had trusted for years, and the reason behind it was almost too bizarre to believe. Peyton was a typical 12-year-old girl living in Waukesha, Wisconsin. She was kind, quiet, and loved spending time with her friends. Among her closest companions were 2 classmates, Morgan Gaser and Anissa Weir. The 3 had been friends since elementary school, and Peyton had no reason to fear them. But in May 2014, her world would change forever. On the morning of May 31st, Peyton went to a sleepover at Morgan's house. The girls stayed up late, played games, and even went to the park the next day. Everything seemed normal. What Peyton didn't know was that Morgan and Anissa had been planning something for months. Something dark, twisted, and deadly. The 2 girls had become obsessed with a fictional horror character from the internet known as Slender Man. They believed that if they killed someone in his name, he would spare their families and invite them to live in his mansion in the forest. That morning, the girls walked into a wooded area near a local park. Peyton thought they were just playing, but then, in a moment that still haunts her and the nation, Morgan pulled out a kitchen knife. Encouraged by Anissa, she stabbed Peyton 19 times, in the arms, legs, and torso. One of the wounds missed her heart just by a millimeter. Bleeding and barely able to move, Peyton was left in the woods. The 2 attackers walked away, believing she would die there. But Peyton didn't give up. She crawled to a nearby path where a cyclist found her and called 911. Her survival was nothing short of miraculous. Doctors later said had she arrived just a few minutes later, she might not have made it. Morgan and Anissa were arrested within hours. They were found walking along the highway, still carrying the knife. When questioned by police, they showed no real understanding of the gravity of what they have done. They spoke about Slender Man as if he were real, something they had to obey. It was clear that mental health played a major role in what they had done. The legal battle that followed was complicated. Both girls were charged with Anissa eventually pled guilty and was found not criminally responsible due to mental illness. She was sentenced to 25 years in a mental health institution. Morgan was also found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a state psychiatric hospital for up to 40 years. Peyton, meanwhile, faced a long and difficult recovery. Physically, she'd healed, but emotionally, the scars were deep. She had been betrayed by the two people she trusted. She later spoke publicly about the attack, saying that while it changed her life, she refused to let her define her. In 2006, the quiet town of Medicine Hat, Alberta, was rocked by one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history. At the center of it was a 12-year-old girl named Jasmine Richardson, who became the youngest person ever convicted of multiple murders in Canada. What made the case even more shocking was that the victims were her own family. Jasmine appeared to be a typical preteen. She lived with her parents, Mark and Deborah Richardson, and her 8-year-old brother, Jacob. From the outside, it looked like a normal, middle-class household. But Jasmine had a secret. Had fallen in love with a 23-year-old man named Jeremy Steineck, who was obsessed with goth culture, vampires, and dark fantasies. Jasmine had met him online, and despite the huge age gap, the two quickly became inseparable. Jeremy told people he was a 300-year-old werewolf. He drank blood, wore dark makeup, and lived in a fantasy world. And Jasmine was pulled right into it. When Jasmine's parents discovered the relationship, they were horrified. They tried to keep their daughter away from Jeremy, grounding her and taking away internet access. But the more they tried to intervene, the more rebellious Jasmine became. She and Jeremy began talking about a plan, one that would remove her parents from the picture entirely. On April 23, 2006, that horrifying plan became real. Jasmine and Jeremy entered the Richardson home with knives. First, they attacked her parents. Mark and Deborah fought back, but they were both brutally stabbed to death. Then, in the most chilling part of the crime, 8-year-old Jacob was found hiding. According to the court records, Jasmine herself stabbed her little brother, later saying it was because she felt it would be cruel to leave him without parents. After the murders, the couple fled the scene. Police discovered the bodies the next day during a welfare check, and a massive search began. Jasmine and Jeremy were arrested the following day in Saskatchewan, laughing and cuddling in a truck, as if nothing had happened. In court, Jasmine was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder, but because she was only 12, she could not be tried as an adult under Canadian law. She was found guilty and received the maximum youth sentence allowed at the time, 10 years, which included psychiatric treatment and community supervision. Jeremy Steineck, who was 23 during the killings, was tried as an adult. He was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. What shocked many was Jasmine's behavior after the crime. She showed little emotion in court and later described the killings in a matter-of-fact way. But over time, her case became the subject of intense debate about brainwashing, influence, and whether someone so young could truly understand the consequences of her actions. Jasmine completed her sentence in 2016. Her identity is now protected under Canadian law. She is living somewhere in Canada with a new name and a sealed record. Jeremy remains in prison and has since changed his name to Jackson May.